Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome to session 4 of 6 of the 2025 Grant Wood Country Forum, where we whirl around in the art and culture and history of all things Grant Wood and Grant Wood Country. And today we'd like to, well, before I talk about what we're doing today, I want to be sure to thank our online host, Cedar Rapids Public Library, for their assistance and the fact that they are getting all these sessions uploaded to their YouTube channel. So you can go back and watch this and share it with friends. And as we gather, sometimes from coast to coast, this isn't just an Iowa thing or a local thing. This is this can be from wherever worldwide, because Grant Wood belongs to, maybe we feel like he belongs to us Iowans more than some, but he's so iconic that a little piece of him appears to be all over the globe. So at least tonight we're going to have a presentation by Tom Hovren. And before we get started with Tom, we'll announce what is coming up next week and the following week. Next week is going to be featuring author and daughter of Grant Wood Country, Dorothy Bunning Montgomery. She's going to share some of her research for her new book, The Stone City Author, that'll be released soon. And we will also, on February 11th, our final session, which coincides with Grant Wood's birth and death dates, will be featuring a presentation by Joe Coffey called Small Treasures, The Joy of Collecting Grant Wood Ephemera. So that'll be fun. Speaking of having a piece of Grant Wood, literally. We'll have our special guest also, Iowa's Poet Laureate, Vince Gutierrez. He'll be reading some of his own Grant Wood poetry and discussing his role in judging our forum-sponsored Grant Wood Poetry Award through the Iowa Poetry Association. And this is kind of almost, we have an addition to this celebration session. Also, we are inviting in for a special presentation, and this last session will go longer than the other ones because we're celebrating and because we can. We've invited in Ignacio Darnaud from West Hollywood, and he is going to be presenting around Arnold Comes of Age, one of Grant Wood's artworks, subtitled A Coded Window into Grant Wood's Queer Life. And in this forum, you know that we've talked about Grant Wood's life, and especially maybe some of the struggles he had when he was at the University of Iowa, and around his identity and that sort of thing. And so Ignacio will be popping in to give us his presentation, which he's done in many places, and he's also written in national journals about this topic. So that's going to be really a fun way to get another point of view. And let's see, am I missing anything? And tonight, as warm up, this is a poetry friendly forum, so we invite those creative voices to be heard. And we have Linda Armstrong has a couple pieces for us that she's worked on and would like to share with us as we warm up before Tom's presentation, which is entitled, by the way, The Grant Wood Florilegium, Commonplace Notes on the Horticultural Significance, Symbolism, and Meaning of the Plants Depicted in the Artist's Works. So that'll be fun. So please warm us up, Linda, and the rest of you. You are certainly welcome to shoot me an email if you'd like to share something at one of the next two sessions. We definitely are making space at our final session for whoever would want to share poetry or some creative writing. We're doing that as well. So I think that's all the kind of announcements and housekeeping I have. So without further ado, we'd love to hear from you, Linda.
Thanks, Elaine. I got a little wordy with these poems, so we may only do one tonight. I'll leave it up to you. Do you think I could do a screen share?
Sure.
If I can maneuver that. Did that work?
We're not seeing anything on our end,
Oh, that's
Linda.
because I forgot to hit the share. One more try. If it doesn't work, I won't waste your time with it. Did that work?
Yeah, we're not seeing anything.
Okay, we'll just forget that. I had a photo from this summer when the forum group visited the hill where Grant Wood painted Fall Plowing. And those of you who were there, I'm sure you'll have the image in your mind of one of Grant's rounded green hills surrounded by a fringe of woods. And that's kind of where was my starting point in this poem called The Wee Ones. The big woods along the Wapsie Valley became a home for all of those who arrived. Farmers, millers, sawmen, quarrymen, preachers, teachers. They brought their families with them. They brought their stories too. Stories of the wee ones from lands so far away. Later, artists like Grant Wood finally joined the throng. Grant often sat with his easel in the open field of prairie remnants, ripe with blooming sedges, with dense, lush woods rimming round the edges. A place to create, his brushstrokes smooth and strong. Standing in that very field on a breezy summer day, I thought the wee ones felt quite near. Maybe Grant Wood felt the same when he was working here. Surely the wee ones would have come with those who loved this place and made themselves at home. Though the gnomes might grumble, they would want to come. How could they resist a nap beneath the mayapple in the shade? The elves and Nisa would love the deep, dark woods where the brownies could hide to play their games and the fairies could paint the flowers. Perhaps Grant saw the elves dancing in the shadows of the leaves. He might have heard the giggles from the Nisa, tickled by the bees. The brownie's tricks to hide his brush or spill his paint would not have been so scary. His inspiration might have been the whispers of a fairy. It has been so long ago, I will never know for certain if the wee ones helped Grant's art. It's fun to think it's true. I'll leave it up to you. For me, I'll continue to believe in the wee ones on that hill.
Thank you. Thank you. Grant's work definitely always seems to have some way to inspire, liter, literature in some way, invoke fables and literature and all those resonances, fairy tales and fairies. Oh, thank you for sharing that, Linda. Well, without further ado, I think we would like to welcome Thomas Hovren here to share his presentation with us. And Tom, I would love for you to tell the group a little bit about yourself, your background, kind of why you're interested in this particular topic. And yeah, don't be shy. Just tell us all the things.
Okay. Well, thank you, Elaine. I have a little bit of a biographical introduction built into the slideshow, which my mission control specialist, Joe Coffey, is going to share because we were late tonight because I have like a 4-year-old version of Zoom on my machine and it was not letting me do a screen share with you. So we're going to try to collaborate on this one. So biographically, I was born in 1962 and raised on a farm outside of Norway, Iowa. My dad first placed me into the tractor seat of a third-hand Alice Chalmers at the age of 10. My first awareness of Grant Wood was around the same time, standing in the lunch line at school, peering at an odd print that hung in the hallway outside the main office. Looking at it broke my brain because instead of looking at the picture, I had to look down and into the image. I'm not certain which of Grant Wood's pictures it was, but it must have been the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, Stone City, or Young Corn. Today, I find myself residing just down the road from my boyhood farm and school on an acreage near Hyamana. As it turns out, the view across the road from my current home also captivated Grant Wood and is the subject of his 1931 landscape, Young Corn. Painted as a memorial to Linnie E. Schloman, daughter of pioneers and pioneering first female superintendent of schools in Benton County, and later a beloved teacher at Woodrow Wilson School in Cedar Rapids, which I believe is where Grant Wood also taught. In 1986, I earned a BA in art and design from Iowa State University. I was a full-time artist and gallery owner in Amana, Iowa for 10 years in the late 1990s, then moved on to become a product developer and marketing specialist for a local manufacturer of natural product consumer goods. I'm recently retired, and while a return to making art is part of my plans, I am currently captivated by a forever growing interest in plants. I'm not a plant hoarder, I'm a plant lover. Here's a slide that shows about 1/8 of my entire collection of plants. It's a little out of control. So that brings us to the presentation tonight. I just want to say I'm not credentialed to talk about Grant Wood or his art as any kind of authority on the subject. I'm not an art historian, scholar, or even a competent researcher, as you'll soon see. But my fascination with wood and my living context compel me to add to the discussion, which brings me here, having been encouraged to contribute to the Grant Wood Country Forum by my colleague and kind friend, Joe Coffey. I don't believe that Wood put anything into his meticulously composed paintings that didn't have an always compelling and oftentimes critical reason for being there. And although his work has been approached and analyzed through many lenses of critical thinking, from the imagery and the people that Wood portrays, his technique, his upbringing, his psychological state, and even his sexuality, I haven't uncovered a dedicated focus on the plants that he carefully and deliberately includes in a majority of his pictures. Plants are growing expressions of life that we as humans have commoditized, consumed, cherished, and ascribed meaning to across cultures and history. Plants aren't just studied through botanical and horticultural lenses, but they have been a focus of the science of ethnobotany for decades. Ethnobotany is the study of how people use plants for food, medicine, tools, weaponry, shelter, ritual, etc. It's clear that plants would offer an artist like Grant Wood a treasure trove of reference material on which to build his signature layerings of symbolism, commentary, and meaning. Plants are just as mute as Wood's paintings and as tight-lipped as his portrait subjects, but I contend they are as meaningful an area of study as anything else that Wood has tantalizingly provided to captivate us. The purpose of my proposed Florilegium is to explore his work through the plants and to see where that leads. How it works and what you'll see is that I'm finding the plants in Wood's paintings, then using that ethnobotanical lens to examine the botanical science, our history with the plants, and then noting the actual as well as purely symbolic resonances that occur. I feel it's a good policy to talk about Grant Wood, or anyone for that matter, as if they were in the room with us. So please note that the relevancies that I see and share might not square with Wood's understandings and objectives. In other cases, I might only be describing incredibly relevant synchronicities that have nothing to do with the artist's original intentions. Either way, I most desire that the Florilegium simply expand our appreciation and experience of an incredible man and his art. I don't propose that any of these Florilegium offerings are arguments for or against Wood's actual vision, which will always, thankfully, be a mystery at best. So a Florilegium is generally a beautiful compendium of illustrated botanical subjects, usually around a theme such as a group of plants like ferns or a habitat, such as prairie wildflowers, etc. The term commonplace refers to the literary tradition of compiling thoughts, insights, conclusions around the subject at hand. Such commonplace compendiums become in themselves invaluable items for researchers and scholars to delve into to further build knowledge and insights around the subject in focus. Nan Wood Graham's own scrapbooks and collected ephemera around her brother are wonderful examples of a commonplace undertaking. As it exists today, my Florilegium is a commonplace collection at its most beginning phase. I will cover just one painting and 4 plants today. It is my intention to perhaps formalize the collected work into an actual book at some point if the undertaking proves to be a critically worthwhile endeavor. So the main themes and iconographic language that Grant Wood uses again and again in his art include people, as in the couple in American Gothic, the landscape, as in the precipitously rolling hills of young corn, the architecture, as in the American Gothic house, animals like the chickens in Adolescence, and finally the plants, as in Woman with Plants. Any one of these iconic themes offer in themselves legitimate avenues of inquiry and research into Wood and his art. If I were younger and more than one person, I'd also love to undertake the Grant Wood Bestiary that would explore his animal subjects, for instance. But I will stick to plants for now. The specific role that plants occupy in Wood's art include decoration, as in overmantel decoration, establishment of location, and setting of time, as in spring in town and spring in country, and finally, symbolism, again, as in Woman with Plants. So today I wanted to share some of the initial notes and insights I've gathered around my first foray into the Grant Wood Florilegium concept, that being the plants he depicts in Woman with Plants, dated from 1929. The well-described Hans Memling inspired portrait of his mother, Hattie. The general consensus is that Wood switches out the typical portrait of European aristocracy and background for the worth and beauty he sees in the everyday subjects and landscapes of Iowa. Please take note of his title. It's not My Mother or Hattie Wood with the mother-in-law's tongue, but it's the more nonspecific Woman with Plants. Aside from Wood's early, not quite stylistically delineated lollipop trees, there are 4 plants in this painting that I'd like to explore. The first is Dracaena sansevieria trifasciata, the famous mother-in-law's tongue or snake plant. The mother-in-law's tongue plant holds symbolic associations with hardiness, simplicity, the mother figure, Eve, Africa, weaponry, the bow and arrow, swords, and the lance, protection, regeneration, immortality, camouflage, the snake, rebirth, and of course, sharp-tongued gossip and henpecking. The next plant is Begonia erythrophila, the beefsteak begonia. Its symbolic associations include sacrifice, beef, flesh, and blood, vigor, sustenance, nourishment, and home cooking. Followed by Zea mays, corn or maize, and it is symbolic of pre-industrial agrarian Eden, in Wood's context at least. The father figure, Adam, the new world, the male form, male as provider, and male sexuality. And finally, the last plant, one that's often overlooked, is Pelargonium graveolens, the rose-scented geranium. Its symbolic associations include sweetness, home, cleanliness, the mother's role, love, nurturing, nostalgia, domesticity, alchemy, the essence of life, and transcendence. First up, the snake plant. The species name derives from tri meaning three and fasciata meaning bundled sticks. So named because the plant typically pushes up a sprout of three main leaves, just as Wood accurately pictures, before the underground stem sprouts again and pushes up another bundle of leaves in rapid spreading succession. It's this exponential growth habit that makes the plant so enduring and amenable to propagation and distribution as a cherished pass-along plant, which is what so many of us are continuing to do today with the repeatedly cloned offspring of the very mother plant depicted in Wood's painting. I'm sure a lot of you have a cutting of Hattie's original plant, as do I. The snake plant she holds provides a rich resource of symbolism, layering of meaning, and threads of synchronicity for us to tug on, beyond the trope of interfering, sharp-tongued mother-in-law, or even the rightly noted symbol of hardiness, durability, and adaptability. Mother-in-law's tongue is native to the heart of Africa, the mother continent to all of humanity and the origin point of prototypical and mitochondrial Eve. The woman in the portrait has been compared iconographically to Eve, sitting in a kind of agrarian Eden. In the portrait, the woman cradles the potted snake plant as a kind of controlled and tamed stand-in for the serpent of Eden. The mother-in-law's tongue grows from lush tropical forested areas to seasonally arid savannas and open plains in Africa. It endures both the overabundance and lack of rainfall, and oftentimes intense grazing pressures. It can bounce back from months of dry conditions and regrow from its underground stems, even if it is grazed to the ground. It isn't just a symbol of hardiness, durability, and persistence. It embodies these traits in its adaptations and physical growth. The common name ascribed to the plant in its native Africa is bowstring hemp. The silky white and resilient plant bast fibers in the leaves are separated from the leaf pulp and twisted into cordage that is used in bowstrings for small game hunting purposes. In the African Yoruban religious tradition of its homeland, the plant is associated with Ogun, the Orisha or god of war. The sword-like leaves are reminiscent of Ogun's dual battle swords. In Afro-Cuban and Brazilian syncretic religious traditions such as Santeria, the plant is associated with Ogun cloaked in the guise of Saint George, the dragon slayer. The lance-like leaves reminiscent of the weapon St. George used to slay the dragon. A common name for the Dracaena genus happens to be dragon palm. Because it is so vegetatively prolific, mother-in-law's tongue will occasionally throw out a sprout with a different leaf form or color called a sport. One of the most common sports of the snake plant has a golden band of variegation running down its leaves. Again, in Yoruban religion, the golden variegated sport of the plant is associated with Oya, the Orisha of storms. The golden leaf variegation is reminiscent of a bolt of lightning. And again, in the Santeria religion, the variegated form of the plant is associated with Oya, cloaked in the guise of Saint Barbara, the sword-wielding patron of protection from storms as well. Looking at the woman in Wood's painting with this information, we see not just a portrait of a generic woman, mother, or farm matron, but a potential deity or warrior saint, possessing powerful defensive and protective powers for the landscape she presides over. The snake plant is held at the woman's side in the portrait, in the area where God pulled a rib from Adam to produce Eve. Wood visually flips the script on this doctrine in his painting. If we view a severed snake plant leaf as the rib of Eve rather than Adam, the analogy is supported with the snake plant's ability to generate a new plant from the removed leaf. Snake plants contain what are called secondary meristematic cambial cells. They possess cells in the outside leaf layer that can divide and differentiate into an infinite number of cloned replica organisms without the need for male sperm or fertilization. Botanists theorize that the gray and green patterns on the snake plant's leaves serve to camouflage the plant by breaking up its outline and solid green color, providing protection from grazing herbivores. You can see this effect in the upper right-hand picture, wherein the leaves effectively disappear amongst the seasonally dry stems and leaves of other plants. Another possible adaptation, which is common in plants that grow in intensely sunny location, is that the lighter areas of variegation reflect solar radiation away from the plant, reducing heat stress, desiccation, and scalding. The naturally camouflaged snake plant offers a resonating synchronicity between the plant and Grant Wood's stint as a camouflage painter at Camp Dodge in Des Moines during the First World War. To explore the synchronous camouflage connection even further, the namesake reptile for the snake plant commonly comes in many patterns of outline obscuring disruptive camouflage. Pictured here are 4 different species of snakes that have all evolved the same outline disrupting camouflage as the plant. Prehistoric imagery that pairs the snake and the female human form occurs across many cultures and over many ages throughout the world. Pictured on the left is an example from North America. The snake is also associated with water in much ancient art. Pictured at center is the Great Serpent effigy mound on Brush Creek in Ohio. The snake may be pictured as a river spirit and associated with rainfall, or it may be associated with the underworld, emergence, birth, and the immortal regeneration of life. Snakes continually renew themselves by shedding their skin, seeming to emerge from the dead husk of their former selves as a new entity. Snakes move like rivers across the land. A river's flow is always arriving, but also flowing away. Yet the river is perpetually present as a delineated geological feature upon the land. The 3 states manifested at the same time with no beginning or end becomes a sophisticated metaphor for the illusion of time. Immersed in the river's flow, we are caught in the moment, but observing it from above in a kind of 4th dimension, we see the river's origin in rain, the present location of its flow before us, its eventual demise in the sea, and its rebirth as rain clouds. Animal effigy, burial, and ceremonial mound constructions by ancient indigenous cultures are often built on promontories above flowing rivers, as in Effigy Mounds National Monument over the Mississippi River right here in Iowa. The mound form reflects the rounded form of the pregnant female abdomen, the buried body within the mound, a kind of fetus gestating until its birth into the afterworld. Wood depicts the woman in Woman with Plants in the same locale that Native Americans typically build these mounds, outdoors overlooking a river valley. Consciously or not, he emphatically takes up this symbolic imagery in the painting, with the snake plant as the stand-in for the time-transcending river spirit itself. The composition seems to be referencing the river below and the regeneration of life, symbolized in the snake plant she holds. As in ancient art, the snake, here in the cloaking guise of the plant, is depicted as a companion animal to the female shaman figure, making the painting as much shaman with plants as woman with plants. Another coincidence, recent DNA sequencing performed on the former genus Sansevieria reveal it is a recent evolutionary expression within the genus Dracaena. The morphological differences of the former Sansevieria that we see with our eyes are negligible compared to the vast majority of information that is present on the once hidden genome. This new information places these plants solidly into the Dracaena complex, despite their outward appearances. Just like Wood and his art, what meets our eye is more than what is presented as far as mother-in-law's tongue is concerned. This is one Wood-connected secret whose truth can be told confidently through genomic science. So take heart in that fact, even though that after today you will be incorrect if you continue to call this plant Sansevieria instead of Dracaena. A further synchronicity here is that defunct Sansevieria, having now been placed into Dracaena, also necessitates the adoption of the common name for Dracaena genus, which is cornstalk plant of all things. Who could have seen it coming? Certainly not Wood when he juxtaposed Dracaena trifasciata with actual cornstalks in this painting 96 years ago. The next plant we'll turn our attention to is the beefsteak begonia that appears in the lower left side of the painting. The name of the plant is derived from erythro, meaning red, and phylla, meaning leaf. Unlike much of the begonia genus, which can be notoriously fussy plants in cultivation, beefsteak begonia is a man-made hybrid that exhibits remarkable vigor that has sustained the plant through countless pass-along cuttings over many decades. It has thrived in many dim-lit Victorian parlors and continues to thrive in the desiccating rooms of our modern central air regulated homes. Polish botanist and impressive neckbeard enthusiast Joseph Warswicks hybridized the beefsteak begonia in Germany in 1845, 13 years before the birth of Wood's mother. Warswicks made a cross between two Central American species, Begonia manicata and Begonia hydrocaudaleifolia. His new plant combines the impressive leaf size of the manicata parent with the impressive coloration of the hydrocaudaleifolia parent. The beefsteak begonia possesses the same type of secondary meristematic cambial cells that the snake plant has and can easily be propagated in water or soil from leaf, stem, and rhizome cuttings. The plant likely spread as a popular pass-along plant in its German birthplace and was carried to America, where it also proliferated to eventually show up in the Wood household at least as early as 1929, when Wood painted the painting. So named because the undersides of the leaves rather unsettlingly resemble a complete slice of raw round steak from the haunch of a beef cow. The haunch consists of the buttock and thigh muscles, the largest and most exercised group of muscles in a cow. Round steak is very lean and potentially tough when cooked and served. One has to have quite a bit of talent and experience as a cook to effectively prepare round steak. My father was a trained butcher, and my family raised and dressed our own beef growing up. My mother would prepare tough cuts like round steak by dredging them in flour, browning in a skillet with onions, and deglazing with water to create a braise that would simmer for an hour or so until it reduced into a thick gravy and the meat would become fork tender. It was a job that couldn't be rushed, and required a keen sense of temperature, timing, and proper seasoning levels. The beefsteak begonia that Wood pictures in Woman with Plants is a talisman of the nurturing and caring abilities of the painting's subject, a visual metaphor for the farm-raised beef that she is deftly able to cook, by which she provides nourishment to her family. Successful cooking and plant growing both require a special aptitude. Wood includes it as a symbol for all that the woman conjures: familial nourishment, sustenance, and strength. The symbolism instructs us that the woman's power manifests nurture out of nature, a lesson that flesh is as fecund as the Iowa soil, and that blood is thicker than the waters that snake around the state's rolling hills. He underscores this relationship to these concepts and the mother that manifests them by signing his name clearly on the leaf of the plant. Next, we'll turn our attention to the corn. Corn is native to southern Mexico and was domesticated well before European conquest. The corn of Wood's time was hybridized and selected utilizing plant husbandry, the hand or open pollinated crossbreeding of strains to increase vigor, size of the ears, yield, etc. Just as was done in ancient prehistory by indigenous populations who first brought maize into cultivation. Wood depicted corn often in his work: corn seedlings, corn shocks, and whole ears. Bundled shocks of corn are most often portrayed. As ubiquitous in his landscapes as is his windmill totem, which he renders almost unfailingly standing over the corn shocks, which resemble ranks of men standing in the fields. It is significant that Wood depicts a specific, already at the time of his adulthood, window of obsolete time that occurred before the advent of the mechanized planting and harvesting of corn in America. He depicts the era of Iowa agriculture as it would have appeared when he was a small boy on the family's farm. This lithograph is a tutorial on what corn harvesting looked like when Wood was a boy. The harvest generally started when the stalks were still partially green, but as soon as the ears were filled out and the corn kernels were mature and ready for drying. Before horse-drawn cutting and binding machines came along, the stalks would have been gathered and cradled in one arm and cut at the base with a corn knife or machete wielded in the other hand. The bundle would be stood up against several uncut stalks, then the process repeated, coming from the other direction. The collected cuttings would then be tied securely under the tassels, but above the ears. The secured stalks were then left to stand in the field and dry. A horse-drawn wagon with a side-mounted backboard or bangboard would be pulled through the partially cleared field to the standing shocks, the ears of which would be hand-picked and husked using a wooden corn peg or metal hook secured in the palm of the hand. The wagon would be drawn into the farmyard where bushel by bushel the corn was carried into storage, fed to livestock, or shelled for the home pantry, or for sale. A bushel, consisting of about 50 ears of corn, was the largest and most efficient quantity of corn to be carried by a single farmer, thus establishing the basic unit of measure that persists until today. The farmer is pictured doing his own seed selection by saving the choicest, healthiest, and most disease-resistant open-pollinated ears of corn, which are strung and drying on the barn. These would provide the seed to be saved for sowing in the fields the following spring. These images depict corn harvesting more contemporaneously to the world that Wood worked in as an adult artist. The rare and problematic horse-drawn implements and later steam-powered tractors and belt-driven corn husker shredder machines were giving way to more affordable and convenient gasoline-powered tractors, corn pickers, and shelling machines. Yet Wood never depicts any of these rapidly accumulating modernizations that he surely would have witnessed transforming the landscapes and people of Iowa. Instead, he continued to focus on the hand-based, human touch operations of his boyhood throughout his life. He continued depiction of corn as a hand-planted, harvested, home-based commodity, perhaps points to a desire to preserve a vision of the farm and the mother and father as a pre-corrupted Adam and Eve occupying the agrarian Eden. Why did Wood so carefully position and paint the woman's hand as the secondary point of interest in the painting? He is surely providing some critical meaning here beyond the hand being a compositional signpost that carries our eyes to the plant. What do we see in this detail? Wood's depiction of his mother's hand isn't just of a work-worn hand, it is a masculinized hand, as fit to hand harvest corn as it would be to tenderly cradle the cherished potted snake plant, which could be a stand-in for the corn plant as well as a kind of memento mori of the deceased husband. The ring finger is double ringed with her wedding band alongside the absent man's wedding band. The masculinized hand and the double ring render the woman widow as occupying the dual role of both figures. Woman and the absent but subsumed man. The pot filled with earth is a metaphor for the grave mound occupied by the man, as well as her now fallow womb. Recent studies have established that there is a correlation between the elevated release of masculinizing testosterone hormone into the uterus during gestation and the length of the ring finger. A hand that has a longer ring finger in relation to the index finger indicates the effect of masculinizing testosterone in utero. Wood is signaling in the composition a sort of sexual duality in the subject and or that he is a keen observer of this duality. Much less frequently than corn, Wood depicts sheaves of grain, which are different than shocks of corn. Iconographically, Wood treats corn shocks and sheaves of grain as male-gendered in their form and production. They anthropomorphically resemble men standing in a field, and they are planted, cut, and bundled by men typically. Whether tied at the neck, as in corn shocks, or tied at the waist, as in wheat, barley, and oats, they are stand-ins for the male body. It is telling, therefore, that Wood is much more focused on presenting corn, and especially male hand manipulated, rather than non-intimately machine processed ears of corn, which dangle provocatively below the tied waist of the bundled corn shock. Not only in Woman with Plants, but in many of Wood's paintings, the depiction of corn picking and grain threshing belongs exclusively to the men that plant, grow, and harvest these crops. His work shows us that he is enamored of the bodies, the fraternity, and the masculine power that is displayed in their efforts. He is, after all, the windmill that pumps the water, that fills the tanks, that the men anoint their bodies with. At the same time, Wood lovingly notes and elevates the women that serve the sustaining food they've conjured, using their own mysterious alchemical cooking abilities upon the yield of grain provided by the labor of the strong men. The so-called women's work of cooking is a modern echo of the indigenous women of the distant past, who likely tended the open fires and pots of boiling maize that brought together the catalytic elements for the nixtamalization of corn: water, lye from wood ashes, and calcium carbonate from limestone. Stone City stone is a source of that calcium carbonate. The discovery of nixtamalization unlocked the digestibility and nutrients bound up in raw corn seed. a metaphor for the process of fertilization that occurs within the woman when the ovum unlocks the genetic material bound up in the male sperm cell. I don't think that any of this speaks as much to Wood's closeted sexuality or potential Oedipal hangups as much to his, to borrow a dicily appropriated cultural term, two-spirited uniqueness. Wood is positioned as a powerful and healthy bi-spirited observer of these literal and metaphorical sexual roles, dualities, and exchanges. He capably illustrates that he possesses the unique gift to appreciate, if not move through and around these spaces and roles. In this light, his pronunciation that his favorite drawing space as a child was under the tables where women were cooking and men were eating expands in its meaning and significance. Take note of the queer inclusion of the tufted, three-legged parlor stool amongst the sturdy dining chairs around the table in Dinner for Threshers, a metaphor perhaps for Wood sitting under there as the third gendered seer, one leg of the stool being his mother, the other his father, and the third himself, in both their images, but completing the unique triad of balance. He is a seer, positioned above and below the sideboard. Finally, the often overlooked in the painting Woman with Plants is the rose geranium. It's identified by the two partially obscured leaves that Wood has carefully rendered in the lower right-hand corner. We only see the leaves, not the plant's stem or diminutive flowers, but it is unmistakably Pelargonium graveolens. Like the snake plant in the painting, the rose geranium is also native to the mother continent of Africa, specifically the Cape provinces. Rose geranium is commercially grown in other areas of Africa where it is steam distilled for its aromatic essential oil, widely used to scent perfume, fragrances, body care, and home cleaning products. Its ease of growth and high yield of oil make it an affordable alternative to luxury priced pure rose flower oil. If Hattie Wood didn't grow the plant, she may very well have enjoyed the scent in her bath and home care products. Rose geranium serves as a humble but pleasant fragrance. Perhaps Wood includes it here to signify the nostalgic, scent-triggered memories of his mother and the home she kept and sheltered him in. The invisible scent he alludes to is perhaps a metaphor for the invisible spirit of love that existed between them and permeated the home. In the painting, Wood presents a visual triad in the right side quarter panel with images of grain, aromatic plant, and the river between them. The grouping takes on a powerful connotations if we explore it further. Water is the alchemical catalyst for maceration and distillation of both perfumed essence from scented geranium leaves and alcoholic spirits from grain. Both are enlightening in moderation, but intoxicating in excess. Wood depicts water in the river, bookended by the male in the field cropped corn shocks and the female in geranium houseplant. Like Christ on the cross, the life-giving river issues from the woman's right side. Wood himself appears as his windmill totem with the blades facing in the same direction as the woman's gaze. Note that a windmill's purpose is to draw water from the ground as a vital farm resource. The waters of the river umbilically connect Wood and the woman as they face the prevailing wind. The river of life could even be issuing from a concealed wound, opened by the sword-like leaves of the snake plant held on the left side of the painting, a potential stand-in for the Roman centurion's lance, but also a powerful symbol of sexual union with the now absent male. If we use plants in the painting to triangulate to the identity of the sitter, she starts to take on a guise that is much more than Hattie Wood, mother of the artist. She is more still than the generic woman in the title. She is prototypical Eve, Earth Mother, wise crone, goddess Gaia, and self-sacrificing and providing savior. Contemplation of the woman in the Woman with Plants painting through the lens of the signifying botanicals assembled around her has brought me to a certain conclusion about her expanded identity, as well as the critical role that this painting plays in the genesis of Wood's mature path as an artist. The plants certainly took me to a place beyond their role as mere compositional or decorative elements in the work, but in my mind, they've taken the work to a place beyond the regionalist update of a Northern European Renaissance styled portrait that is the universal read ascribed to Woman with Plants. The mother-in-law's tongue is likely the most prominent, recognizable, and remembered plant in the painting, so much so that it is sometimes erroneously titled Woman with Plant instead of plants, plural. There is some indication that Wood originally described the painting as Woman with Plant, but later pluralized the title. Perhaps this slight edit was an effort on his part to boost the recognition and deepen the critically missed symbolic meanings that the other plants in the painting provide. Maybe this in turn was a response to there being too much critical focus and feedback around the negative associations of the snake plant as symbolic of a wicked and judgmental snake-tongued mother-in-law type figure. We too often miss the fact that the painting on a whole isn't a cynical send-up of that type of negative stereotype, but a portrait of deep adoration for the subject. Further, that it isn't a mere copy of all the benefactor-commissioned Renaissance portraiture that Wood was so impressed by. Such works really don't go much beyond the artists offering a paid service of flattery for the benefactor or sitter, displaying the beauty, piety, or power they possess. Woman with Plants is a Renaissance type portrait only stylistically. It is more so an uncommissioned offering, providing the sitter and all women like her with recognition and visibility, rendered in a deeply loving and ennobling way. Grant Wood authentically portrays the sitter for Woman with Plants in possession of measures of piety, power, and beauty that are beyond the realm of flattery, begotten by inherent qualities of character that are in turn beyond those acquired by the aristocracy by birthright, marriage, inheritance, or commerce. Specifically, it is the culturally unique region of Iowa that Wood recognizes and celebrates as the source of these gifts, flowing from the pre-industrialized agricultural Eden of his boyhood and embodied in his mother. Wood realized that his heritage, his artistic talent, and his queer engendered ability to see and appreciate these things created his core opportunity to paint a new kind of humanistic ideal, the unreproachable qualities that flow from the land and through the people of Iowa. The first result of which is Woman with Plants, a masterwork of Wood's original vision and intent that rises above Renaissance benefactor-enabled flattery to elevate humanism and specifically a woman's humanity in a modern, socially democratic standard that we are still trying to recognize as a society, just as we are still struggling to recognize it so skillfully rendered by Wood in this painting. What might have been had the reaction been wholly positive and in line with Wood's aim? I envision a follow-up painting that would complete the couple, a portrait of a noble, adored, and archetypical man with corn, instead of the veiled, cynical commentary he turns to in American Gothic. His temporary substitution painted to address the misreading of Woman with Plants. But the unbridled success of American Gothic changed everything about his intention and the future direction he took. Wood, lying in his deathbed, in his final "after all," did purportedly say that one of his greatest regrets was having never painted a portrait of his father. Imagine him carrying that within him from American Gothic to, at the very last, spring in the country, a rebirth that never came. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was so fun. Oh my gosh. This so much science and connection and symbolism and associations and the art design elements. My goodness, if you went that in depth with every plant in all his paintings, I could see why you would need some assistance.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. So,
Thank you.
anybody have any questions or comments or?
I was just curious, a show of hands, how many people have a sprig of the original snake plant? Well, if you don't, I have a few I can give you.
Yeah, mine's having babies too. So, yeah.
And I also have the beefsteak begonia, which is very prolific. I can get anybody one of those as well. But it's not the same one that was in the painting, most
Mhm.
likely.
Yeah, but now I wonder what came first, the begonia or the beef?
Tom, I have a thought. I'm amazed at how you've just shown us that the histories, or shall we say the prehistories, of some of these plants that are prominent in Wood's this painting anyway, they're not indigenous to Iowa. And I think sometimes it's erroneously even said that Wood only painted indigenous plants to Iowa, but there's this really interesting juxtaposition of things from Mother Africa residing in harmony with indigenous plants in Iowa. That gives me a lot to think about. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I was really struck realizing that both of those plants in both of the lower corners, bookending the figure, are African plants.
Well, and the associations with bi-spirited dualities, that's a fun thing to roll around in. Um, and I mean, to what degree he or any artist would be necessarily conscious of all those things all the time. It just makes you wonder about how how conscious versus unconscious his experience was while he was painting, what he was thinking about, if these things rolled around in his mind.
Yeah, it's impossible to know for sure, but I think
Right.
it's very veiled, right? And symbolic. He's very careful to portray what he sees and why he's in that position that he can see it. I think it's very easy for us to read that as evidence of him suppressing his sexuality by mistake, It's more he's trying to sensitively give us his view that he sees both sides of the coin, both sides of what it takes to, produce the food and raise the family and run a farm and a household.
And are you speaking particularly of those artworks that you were featuring in this presentation?
Yes,
Yes,
for sure.
but not necessarily the same interpretation. It'll be, well, anyway, everybody will have to come back to all the sessions to get a full array of kind of what we may end up rolling around here. See you. When we decided to put Ignacio on the lineup for the last session, it's a great segue. It'll be nice to be able to talk back and forth after his comments too. I mean, it's a great perspective. So I'm anxious for, yeah.
Next step, I kind of want to go back into like I call it the inter-Bohemia period before and while he was in Europe. I think there are some paintings that he did that really kind of speak to where Woman with Plants came from, and that being adoration of the home, which I think is as much an adoration of the central figure of a woman than it is of the tiny little model house that she's holding aloft. And his portrait of Turner, which is very much like a portrait of somebody who possesses power and land and clout as a kind of aristocrat, as they were pictured in Renaissance Europe portraits. Like there's an evolution there that is striking when he gets to Woman with Plants. And then to look at what happens after with American Gothic, which is like there's some abrupt turn stylistically and content-wise that happens. And I don't know for sure if it was a reaction to the criticism or the misread of Woman with Plants. That's something I need to dig into more. But it just, on the surface, to me, it looks like that's what was at play. And then the fact that there was such an overwhelming response from American Gothic, that became his shtick, and his livelihood was making those sorts of portrayals, which he carried through all the way to the end.
Well, you spoke of the hand, and I'm recalling some things that I read in Trip Evans' book when he was analyzing the hand and also the flatness of the mother's chest. And his interpretation was completely different. Or it's in addition, or maybe, I mean, there's no right or wrong interpretation, obviously, but yeah, so he's seen it through a filter of awkwardness of painting the female form. And I'm inclined, I don't know, it's hard to, I'm not sure. I would say that, other than maybe there's modesty at play. There's this natural, at the time you would never sexualize a mother in any way, back then. He adored his mother, anyway. So I don't know. It's just, there's so much that you can say. You can say, speculate on. I think it's fascinating. And when you bring in the stuff about the biology behind certain forms of hands and the dual nature of two spirits and all that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. It's fun to think about that and think about what others have been saying about that painting.
I think it's a mark of really great art and a great artist when a work like that just continues to surprise people decades and decades later. It's like the Mona Lisa. We're still perplexed by it and still discussing it and never getting to the bottom.
Did you say that he did comment that he was sad that he had not done a portrait of his father? Is that true that he said that?
Yeah,
I
know I read it in somebody's book,
okay.
but I didn't really have time to reference it.
Is that in yours, Paul? Had you run into that?
Well, Well, I have read that before too, but there was some question at that point, how clear Grant Wood,
Oh.
in his illness, one was not sure, what some of the things he was talking about. He talked about wanting to paint right at university hospitals, and, his illness had progressed too far for that. But I wanted to say, to Tom, I love your creativity. I mean, how would a person come up with thinking about the plants that are portrayed by an artist? I find that really fascinating, and you did such a nice job with it. I have read that the three plants you described were all part of Hattie's plant collection, and she actually had them in that south window there of the studio. Did you come across that?
I did look at that painting. In the foreground, there's a really big cast iron plant, an aspidistra that you can see. In the background, in the sunlight, I mean, there are a lot of plants there. Um, some of them do look a little bit like geranium. I'm not sure if it's a, a regular garden geranium or a rose scented geranium, but yeah, it's just a little hard to make out, but
Sure. And I might also say that I've known Tom's family for a long time. I had his older siblings in school. So it's just I'm so pleased with his success in this endeavor.
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Paul. Thank you. Paul was the guidance counselor at Norway High School in Norway. The building is long gone,
Yeah.
but I don't know, did you have the office in the Crow's Nest, Paul?
Yes.
There was this really cool room that was way up on the above the roof line, and it was just a single room, kind of like a widow's walk room, and that's where Paul's office was. It was called the Crow's Nest.
Well, as we all know, when Iowans talk to Iowans, it doesn't take long to find the connections.
Eileen, I have a little something to add about the portrait of Francis. So
Yeah.
Nan, and you can reference this in her scrapbooks because I found it and I have a big regret. So when Nan was moving from Riverside after her brother had died, after Frank had died, she moved to Menlo Park, California, and there were quite a bit of items that Frank had that they were, Nan was giving away. So I can't remember how old I was, early 20s, I guess, or late teens. And we had been to the house, and Nan had done a portrait of their father for Frank. She had painted it herself. And he and Frank had it because he lived with her after his wife died. Frank had it in his bedroom. And Nan asked me if I wanted it. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And I didn't, in the end, I didn't take it. But now, of course, 40 something years later, I'm like, why didn't I take that painting? But you can find in her scrapbooks, if you can look at that, Nan actually did paint a portrait of their father and gave it to Frank. So even though Grant never did. Just a
Yeah, I had, yeah, yeah, that's interesting, that connection too.
Mhm.
Do you know where it is now, Debbie?
Barbara, I don't. So there was a lot of things that, so Nan went to live with her friends, there were two sets of friends, Cogswells and the Rosens up in Northern California. And there was a lot of stuff that went with Nan, and then a lot of things they gave away, but I don't know what happened to it. I remember them asking me if I wanted it, and I don't. I remember asking my mom, well, is he related to us? Because I wasn't really sure of the connection, because Frank was a great uncle by marriage, not by blood. So Francis, of course, would not have been a blood relative. So I think maybe that's why I didn't take it with me. But anyway, I wish I knew. It's kind of sad I didn't take them up on the offer. So there's probably a lot of treasures that are lost somewhere.
Well, maybe we'll find out about some of those in a couple weeks when we Joe lets us know about some of the ephemera that's out there.
Right.
Well, some things wouldn't qualify. Yeah, what qualifies as ephemera? We'll find out, right, Joe?
That's a great question. Hey, Tom, I've got a question for you. I'm curious. I know that you appreciate anyone's appreciation for plants, whether they're a botanist, a professional, or just a gardener, aficionado. There's something we can all share in this joy of growing and nurturing things. When you talk about plants and plants in Iowa and the symbolism and the histories, there's a cool world there. What would you recommend to somebody if this wet their whistle and they were interested in learning more about, I don't know, the plants and the places they live and what they have in their gardens, and if we just wanted to connect a little more, instead of just keeping them alive and thriving, to learn more about them? Like, what would you recommend for somebody wanting to take some steps down that journey?
Well, I would say um, the uh, the conservation service, the service from Iowa State, the county extension, um, all the research has been done, all the plant selection has been made, all the detail on how to be successful growing plants or here in Iowa has been made there and is available. It's invaluable. In college, at Iowa State, I was on the 5-year plan, and in my 5th year, I was taking so many botany and horticulture classes that I was just a few credits away from minoring in it, but ran out of funds and I had to leave that behind. So, I mean, I've been interested in them all my life, as much as art.
Tom, have you looked at his Grant Wood's other paintings with any depth, or are you
No,
thinking about that, or no? You just
not with any
just
depth, but
okay, but
I am looking at them. I want to dive into trees and how he paints them rather abstractly, but also incredibly detailed. I think he got some flack for his ability to paint a tree and the fact
well,
that
what
he
is
made them into the lollipop shapes.
lollipop? Yeah,
But he
you
was
said.
very capable of rendering
Mm.
trees beautifully detailed. Like the branching in Arnold Comes of Age is beautiful, those trees. Um, Also in the birthplace of Herbert Hoover, in the foreground, there's this rounded, like Seussian image of an oak tree. And he just nails like the leaf shape and the veination on the leaves and the acorns and how the morphology of them, but he still renders it in this balloon shape, which is so funny and tongue in cheek, and
Yeah.
it had to have been deliberate, you know.
I think that's a good way when you say tongue in cheek, that
Yeah,
Grant has so much of that in so many of his pictures. And
yes,
we don't even think about the plants,
yeah.
but we, you know, if everything else is being studied, I think it would be great, and you should document, write up your things too. Have you given this talk before?
No, this was the
Oh,
first
this is,
time.
oh, it's just fascinating, and you
Thanks.
just present it so well. Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
Well, we have to thank Joe. He saved us tonight because
Uh,
I I couldn't even see what he was showing. I had my Keynote original document pulled up, reading the notes from that. So I hope that worked out, Joe.
Oh, it
well,
was easy peasy.
we're
Yeah.
happy to be the inaugural journey of this presentation. So don't stop now. You got something going on there.
Yeah, I will update. I will download the new update of Zoom. So hopefully next time if I do this again, it'll be a little better. I had one more thing, if I could just kind of unrelated. Um,
Sure.
so I do live out here in Iowa County where Grant Wood hung out with Carl Flick from Amana, and they did many sketching trips. And, it's right next to the original Schloman farmstead where Lenny Schloman grew up. And that's why he painted that area in Young Corn. But I have been stymied at trying to find the exact view of that farm that appears in the painting. And it's weird. I can see portions of it, but it never looks how it actually looks in real life. So I think that it may very well be a composed picture of different viewpoints. And if anybody has any research or knowledge of where and how that was put together, I would love to hear from them.
Well, you've come to the right group. So if there,
I can tell you a few things on it, Tom. I had always heard too that it was right by what they call the Swedenborgian Church, which is
Yep.
south of Norway. And some people even said that that Grant had stood on top of Lenny's tombstone to get the right angle. But a lot of people said that was not true. So I'm a friend of Peter Henley out in Amana, and I asked Peter where he thought it was. And so I met him in High Amana, and we walked out through they had cattle in the pasture at that time. And we walked out there, and he pointed out a portion of young spring corn, or what am I?
Young.
Young corn.
Yeah.
And he said, this looks to me, and I've been told by the people of Amana that they saw Grant Wood walk back and forth there. As we were leaving, an older woman came, and she said that had been and she lived right there by the gate, and she said, well, that had been a family story for them over the years too, that Grant Wood went into that area. It's an area owned by the Amana Society. And as you said, he was friends there with Carl Flick. And so it could have been.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much what I've been able to gather as well, Paul. But yeah.
Yep.
well, I wonder if anybody could start a new crop in Iowa here. Because what the mothers-in-law tongue is a descendant of the bowstring hemp from Africa. Sounds like that's pretty sturdy stuff.
Yes.
We
You
know
know-
people are dabbling in hemp in Iowa, but
You know, when I got my piece of the from Woman with Plants, I also got the provenance as part of that. And Nan Wood is it? Maybe some of you have the provenance too, but Nan Wood was at the top of it. And the next name down on my provenance, and there's probably 14 different names on it that the plant has passed around. But the second name down was Mrs. Armstrong from the Armstrong department store. So I thought, you know, that this provenance might be pretty right on. And I've given it out now to several people and gave them the provenance on my piece. So
Yeah, it's like it's the perfect little gift to give somebody that's getting married or moving into a new home, and you
Right.
give them the story, and it's
Right.
just a great little thing.
yeah, and put
All,
yeah,
both,
yeah.
both, Dorothy and Mary Higby have, provenances of them also, and I know Dorothy's had Mary Higby's name on it, so yeah, it's all that connection.
Did
Uh,
they
oh,
is the second name down on those Armstrong? Do you know, Debbie?
I don't, because I didn't see copies of them. And Thomas, I was gonna say, have you looked at, you know, those 4 lithographs that are colorized? Have you looked at the plants on those? That would be
Yes.
a good study.
Yeah.
Yeah, the tame flowers and the
Right,
wildflowers.
right.
I have some, I'm compiling some notes about those, yes.
Cool.
You know, I might say too that just in the future, I hope you all tune in with when Ignacio gives his talk on that final session. We correspond with each other, and just recently, as we were talking about a hidden in plain view, he sent me some things. He is a, a writer, a critic. I guess you would call him. Elaine knows Ignacio too. He's from Spain, but has lived in the United States for quite a while. But he said, and he showed me examples of it, he said, look closely at Dinner for Threshers. Well, I've looked at Dinner for Threshers seemingly my whole life. But what he said in it, and he showed me examples, is the men sitting across from each other, looking at each other in almost romantic poses in a couple of cases. And I looked at him and I thought, I'd never noticed that. And whether that was intentional or whether that's just the way it works out, that he wanted to show all of the faces, but um, there is kind of an intimate quality going on there. So take a look at Dinner for Threshers, see what you think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's going to be we'll have a lively time there. So, because there'll be a lot to unpack there as well. Um, and Tom, I really, I want to circle back because I do like this, because it's my feeling that Grant Wood is plenty complex enough to embed lots and lots of things and do it authentically and also tongue in cheek. He's got all that stuff going on. And whether it's the female form or the male form, there's just, like a lot of artists, he thinks deeply, looks deeply, you know, isn't afraid of complexity and
Yeah.
just does what he does. So, it'll be interesting to compare.
Yeah. I mean, he was a worldly man. What, 3 trips to Europe? He had plenty of opportunity to develop his metaphoric mind, and I think it's reflected everywhere.
Well, it's I always want to linger a little bit while people think and absorb, and in case something pops to mind. But it feels like this another awesome presentation and evening together has come and gone. And thank you, Tom, so much for giving us yet another and very different, thorough filter through which to view all things Grant Wood.
I enjoyed this very much, but I must say, I want to know what your sweatshirt says.
So my another interest is craft beer. And so it says born and brewed with the state
Born
of
and brewed. All right. Thank you.
And
Very good celebration.
Iowa.
and thank you, Linda, for your poems. And come back next week and we'll roll around in Stone City and the Stone City author with Dorothy. And she's just always a wealth of connections and information about the people and how everything works and is related to each other. So that'll be fun. So we'll see everybody next week then, I hope.